All right, good afternoon, everybody. It is 4:01, and I'd like to bring the state July 25th, 2023 Committee of the Whole to order. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Allen. Berman,
Berman here.
Doherty,
Doherty here.
Davist, Ford. I'm sorry. Gums,
Gums here.
Iqbal,
Iqbal present.
Juby,
We're here.
No, he's.
Kenyon, Caius,
Vice President.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Lewis,
Who's here?
Linder,
Linder present.
Molina,
Alina present.
Roth,
Roth here.
Sanchez, Silva,
Silva is here.
Stratton, Surgis,
Oh, I want that room.
Tarver,
Carver's here.
Tepe,
Tempe here.
Williams,
Williams here.
Young, Huron.
Here.
You have a quorum in the room.
Here.
Okay, very good. We'll have Mr. Iqbal, you will be allowed to listen because of the Open Meetings Act, you understand, but welcome to listen. And Deb Allen and Mr. Doherty, of course, will be able to participate because they are within reason. So welcome, everybody. And are there any objections to having Ms. Allen and Mr. Doherty attend? No? Okay. Now, let's see. Ms. Bates, you haven't led the Pledge of Allegiance in a while. Your turn.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have two months of minutes to approve. I believe we need to approve them one at a time and not together. So may I please have a motion and a second to approve the May 23rd, 2023 minutes?
Chair, this is Caius. I would ask for unanimous consent to approve the minutes from May 23rd, 2023.
Thank you. Any objections?
Granted.
Granted.
Secondly, this is Caius again. I would ask for unanimous consent for the approval of the minutes from June 27th, 2023.
Granted to everybody? Okay, very good. Thank you. All righty.
Later.
That's all right. Is there any public comment today? I'm not aware of anybody. Is there anybody online? None? Okay, very good. So we're going to have some interesting presentations today, and I'd like to have them begin. The first one is going.
Madam Chair
Yeah,
Gums.
Yes, Ms. Gomes.
I would like to make a motion to suspend the order and call for our closed minute executive so our folks can get out of here. I don't know if that's appropriate.
We have a guest here, and she's come all the way from Chicago. So perhaps we can have, we have such a tight schedule.
No.
Those session minutes. I would suggest we have Miss Brady go, if that would be all right, because she's come all the way from Chicago and she's got a long way to go back home and have her do her presentation.
How are we able to even have a vote even about closed session minutes?
Correct. And this is open. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Good point. Well taken. We cannot go there.
Do we have any closed session minutes?
And here it comes.
Right on cue.
Mr. Shepherd, could you just stand right there? We've got a question. We need an answer to this. It was brought up that there are closed session minutes that we have to approve, but this is committee of the whole where we don't vote on anything.
On the agenda.
You can vote on that.
Oh, sir.
As
There we
action.
go.
Otherwise, you could never approve them.
All right, so that's an answer. So let's get to order.
Simple.
So I'd like to have Erin Allman, Executive Director of CMAP, come up and do her presentation, and welcome, Erin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair Pirog, members of the Kane County Board. I am happy to be here today to talk to you a little bit about the work that we are doing to develop a report of recommendations to the General Assembly as requested by them, looking at the system, the transit system that we have, and addressing some of the financial challenges that face us here in the future. So I believe I do have some slides. If you wouldn't mind, the slides would be great. Thank you very much. Perfect. And then I'll just check to see if I can advance these from here. Perfect. Looks like we're all working. So just to start here, one of the things that we've been centering as we've been talking about the future of transit in our region is really people, and it's really about getting the people in our region to the places that they need to go and having them have options to be able to get there. Sometimes it's great to be able to hop in your car and get to the place that you need to go, but sometimes transit really facilitates a number of people getting to educational institutions, to hospitals, to downtown. So whether it's shopping or healthcare or to visit friends and family, transit does play a critical role in all of our communities at whatever scale that it's at here. And CMAP, the regional planning agency, cares about this because we also understand that the transit system that we have helps alleviate congestion across our region as well. And it also is one of the reasons why businesses choose to locate in the Chicagoland region. And so that vibrant economy really is interconnected with the multimodal transit system that we have here today. So I mentioned just briefly here to ground us in what we're facing is that the pandemic really reshaped the way transit was being utilized in our region when people went home. The federal government stepped in and offered operating assistance for our transit system. And in 2026, the transit operators, CTA, Metra, and PACE are facing about a $730 million annual operations budget deficit. And one of the things that I want to impress upon this board is, that a 20% operational cut to our transit systems, to PACE, Metra, and CTA would equate to about a 40% cut in service across our region, which would mean over 100 cities and towns would no longer have access to Metra, that a number of cities and communities, about 150 bus routes across our region would no longer be able to be in existence. And that's largely due to the capital infrastructure that our transit systems must maintain. So it's not a true 2020 cut. You would really see some deep service cuts across our region. So this is a brief snapshot of the revenues here in 2019 of how we pay for the operations of transit here. About half comes from the regional sales tax. And there is a statutory requirement set by the General Assembly that says 50% of the revenues must come from system generated revenues. So that's a combination of the fares that you pay at the fare box. But in 2023, in the past couple of years, it's really been backstopped by about 21% of federal funding there. And so that's what we're anticipating to run out by 2026. So late last year, the General Assembly asked CMAP to develop a set of recommendations to themselves that really looks at some of the actions our region must take. And I think as we think about that operating gap, it's not insignificant. And so they asked us to look at, operational efficiencies of the transit agencies we might be looking at. How might we reshape the future of transit? Every time I talk to folks about transit in this region, it's not that they're saying they're satisfied with the system that they have, but they would like to have more access. And that transit can allow our communities to be very successful in helping families with elderly residents age in place as well and be able to get to their daily needs without driving. So we have set up a steering committee that we've been meeting with on a monthly basis, and it includes folks that have some experience with transit, but also folks like Chair Cronin, the former DuPage County chair, folks like the Illinois Manufacturers Association, the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, because we recognize that this is sort of a conversation that it requires a multifaceted conversation to have. We've got the Will County Center for Economic Development as well as a number of other stakeholders. But this group is really just responsible for helping us ideate, for helping us come up with those good recommendations. And the CMAP board, which is made up of elected officials from across the region, from Chicago, Cook County, and from the collar counties. This region is represented by Mayor Brawley, president of the Village of Montgomery. And then on our MPO policy committee, which will also be asking to take a vote to help advance these recommendations to the General Assembly, is represented by the Kane County Board Chair Pirog as well. And Mayor Schilke is here as well from the Council of Mayors, also participating in a number of these conversations across the region. So again, I'm out here today because I want to engage you in a conversation about what it is we are developing in terms of those recommendations, understand what your unique needs are. And to that end, if there are conversations that we need to schedule afterwards, I'm happy to come back out to bring my subject matter experts out to really talk about some of these needs. But we've been talking to lots of stakeholders who need to be involved in this conversation. So included in my presentation is a couple of reasons why transit is just so vital. So when IDOT decided to do construction on the Kennedy for the next 3 years, Metro was able to increase their service, and we've actually seen Metro ridership numbers go up over time. And so this transit system does allow us to be a little bit more nimble and think about the travel sheds that folks have. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our beautiful destinations across the region that people come out to see. And sometimes they do take transit as well. So whether they're coming to Elgin, whether they're in Aurora, whether they're coming here to Geneva, these are places that really have built beautiful downtowns that are reliant on our transit systems. And then transit and climate, our long range plan also talks a little bit about the importance of addressing our greenhouse gas increases that we've seen across the region as well. Our transit system is one of the ways that we can address and mitigate the increase in greenhouse gases across our region. And so having that successful system is also another component to the importance of this conversation. All right, so now on to the meat of what we have been talking about with the steering committee, with our board, and with the MPO policy committee members. This legislative mandate, this just outlines the legislation and what the General Assembly asked us to look at. They asked us to look at the long-term financial viability of our transit system. They asked us to look at how comprehensive and coordinated the system is. How does it work today, and how could it be better? I know many of you have heard and seen the headlines about safety and security and cleanliness, which is a barrier for people to get on the bus or get on the train. They're worried about their safety, and what can we learn from other places across the world as to how they address this and mitigate that is some of the ideas that we've been bringing to the table. But that we're thinking about that efficient land use, that we're thinking about how those downtowns that already have built up around their transit stations can continue to support that local economy here. They also asked us to look at some of these umbrella conversations and ideas, racial equity, climate change, economic development, and building all of this on top of the Regional Transportation Authority's strategic planning efforts. So that was our starting point for this conversation. And then as we think about how we actually tactfully address this, is that we should be thinking about, well, what is that recovery ratio? As I mentioned earlier, it's 50% here in our region, statutorily required. But that's the highest recovery ratio for fares in the nation. The next highest one is 30%. And so we should be thoughtful about whether or not that's a hard and fast rule. That's, part of the formula is broken because of that, but part of it is because we haven't seen people come back to transit. The downtown, we've been serving the AM and the PM rush hours of our region and getting those commuters in and out of the city. But now we're seeing people using transit throughout the day. They're using it on Saturdays to get to destinations. And so what is that, what is that future state of our system, and how does the way that we pay for it impact that future as well? So we're looking at governance, we're looking at regional fare systems. I've heard from many mayors across the region that why can't I just have one card and pay one rate and get on all three of these systems and not have to worry about whose system I'm getting on and what the monthly fee is, right? It makes it confusing for people who are coming to our region to visit, but also for people who live here for a long time. I constantly am trying to think about that as I'm getting on different systems as well. And then, they gave us a grab bag of anything else that we thought was important to recommend to them. So the work that we've been doing has been really breaking this down into 3 different buckets. What is that system we want? So we know that transit in 2019, before the pandemic, wasn't addressing all of our regional needs. What is that we want? What could transit be? And how much is that going to cost us? How do we pay for this operations gap that we have? But if there are strategic enhancements to the system that we need, can we add additional revenues there and have both that gap plus asking the transit agencies to provide more service? And then what do we need to do to get that? Do we need to reform the governance structures? Do we need to think about that funding distribution to be able to enhance our transit goals here as a region? I'm not going to spend too much time reading this, but I do want to just give you a sense of what's in that system we want conversation. And really it's that fair integration is one of the things that we have heard loud and clear that we would like those 3 transit agencies to work on. That regional rail might be something that would be successful for this region. So thinking about our transit system in more of a European style model where it's not just focused on the AM rush and the PM rush, but that you've got consistent trains throughout the day that help get people, if you want to take, maybe if you're only in the office for a half day, maybe you need to just get someplace else across the region and that your train is always going to come every 5 minutes after the hour throughout the day. And that we're thinking about how we can support and incent our communities to really have strong transit supportive land use and development, or new employers to think about how they're going to have their employees get to that job site as well as part of this conversation. One of the things that we will also recommend is thinking about our bus systems. Our bus systems require and necessitate our roadway agencies to think about how buses work and function. So we will be making recommendations about how our public sector agencies, whether it's counties or whether it's the state DOT, thinks about accelerating opportunities for transit to be included in their building and their capacity. Universal accessibility. We know that people with disabilities, if a station isn't accessible, it's like it doesn't exist. And so we think that there's some recommendations around that, safety, security, and cleanliness as well. So I'm gonna keep going here and talk a little bit about how we're thinking about paying for it too, is that, this is a tough conversation. I hope nobody brought tomatoes. Nobody wants to talk about new taxes. We know our tax rate is high here in the region. So how do we solve this complicated problem? We are recommending, and I don't have the power to change this, the General Assembly does. So we're really focused on recommendations that are directed at things the General Assembly can control, but tax reforms. One of the things that we could do is lower the effective sales tax rate and broaden the sales tax base. And I'll give you a specific example of how that might work. Is one, you used to be able to go to the store and buy a CD for software for your computer. You bought Adobe Suite. You bought it, you paid taxes on it at the Best Buy, you put it in your computer. Well, nobody buys CDs to put, and in fact, I'm not even sure my computer has a CD player anymore or a disk drive in it, right? But you download it, right? And so you're paying a subscription fee for your, a little bit echo. You're paying a subscription fee for your software as a service, but we don't tax that. But we used to tax it when it was CD. So modernizing the sales tax or the tax on services are things that we are thinking about, and how that might impact and how we might be able to reap some benefits from adjusting that sales tax and bringing things down. We're thinking about pricing through the road system as well. So right now, motor fuel taxes are largely dedicated for road agencies. Rebuild Illinois allowed a little bit of that funding to go to transit, but we recognize that there are some things that'll have to happen in the future as vehicles become electric that we need to be paying attention to and that we need to be thinking about that are a little bit long-term. As I've been out and around the region, the system generated revenues has also been on the table, really making sure that our fares keep pace with inflation as well, has been comments that we've continued to receive, and we think it will be something that we will continue to recommend here. And then also, operational and structural savings is some of the things that we're looking at. We recognize that we can't go down to Springfield and ask for $730 million and not offer anything in return. That would be, a little bit naive of us to do. So what are the things that our transit agencies are doing that save money? What might we do in the future to help make sure that we are being reform-minded and really thoughtful about our approach for our agency's work? Again, I talked about that fare box recovery ratio. And federal funding is always something that we will keep on the table, but at this point in time, I don't think I would hold my breath and expect the federal government to provide us with additional resources to operate our transit systems here locally. So finally, how do you implement this? And thinking about some of the ways that we allocate these resources, we are going through some conversations about system governance. And, I think people often jump to this idea that we should make everything, merge everything together. We want to be thoughtful about that recommendation and think about, how can we better coordinate the system? Is it through the fares? Is it through the service planning? Is it through the capital construction? And what are the cost savings through that? So that's really the lens with which we're looking at the governance conversation. And then again, that fare box ratio continues to show up here again as we think about that future. So we are drafting recommendations right now. We are socializing them. Our plan is to continue to build on prior work that's been done across the region. There's a lot of work related to fares and related to the transit system across our region. So we're leveraging that work. But today I wanted to make sure you are aware of our timeline, get feedback from you on some of the issues that I talked about and what's important to you all here as you serve your communities locally. But again, I can't emphasize enough how much transit does provide that vibrant economy for our local communities that have historically grown up around transit, but also that as we think about our future aging population as well in the region, that we're considering the need for more people perhaps to be able to move around, and fixed rail maybe is really too expensive, but we should be thinking about our bus system and how it could work to be more responsive to people's needs. So with that, the last thing that I will say is that recommendations will be coming in draft form to the board and the MPO Policy Committee in September. We are asking for a vote of approval to send the report recommendations to the General Assembly in October, and our delivery date to the General Assembly by statute is January 1st. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about this or take feedback. So thank you for your time.
Are there any questions, Ms. Bates? I see your hand.
I just have a comment. I want to thank you for pulling climate change and equity into the story.
Thank
That's
you.
Pretty cool. I'm glad. I'm glad because it's a great pitch and it's important.
Yeah, and I think all the work that the legislature has done on the climate and equity space as well, there are transportation solutions that can be a part of that conversation. So we're hoping to elevate that to the General Assembly members.
Because to move one person 50 miles in a car takes 2 gallons of gas. In a train, it takes what? A fraction of that, right?
Yeah, a fraction depending on the number of people on it too.
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
thank you.
Increase the ridership. If you were to, I have a question, if you were going to be changing the schedule of trains, how would that impact the far western suburbs where we are, so that there's an opportunity to get into the city and get back home? Because right now they are heavily influenced on commuting times, regular commuting times, and then sparsely placed between the days. And then at night it drops off completely. What would your thoughts on that?
Well, so one of the challenges with that fare box recovery ratio is that if you're so focused on recovering 50% of your fares to be able to meet that operating threshold, is that you're really focused on those revenue, those highest generating revenue rides, and it limits the agencies in being able to explore where there might be new markets to get people on the train. So for example, maybe you wouldn't put a Sunday, it's a barrier to putting that Sunday service in place. So I think we would rely on where we're seeing people move, where the job sites are, based on some of our travel modeling that we have and looking at how cars are moving across the region, and thoughtfully ask the transit agencies to really look at those new markets in a way that are addressing the way that we're seeing people move. We have a lot of that data today, and we'd ask them to sort of report annually, or maybe it would be quarterly if they were putting new things in place, but that they would work with our counties and our communities to help develop those new markets.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? I think that I would like to just share with the board that transportation seems to be one of those things that just kind of sits here in Kane County. We don't think much about it, but it's critically important to the future of Kane County. And the impact without having buses, without having our trains, is going to impact the future growth of Kane County and our opportunity for economic development. We have to be able to move people in an efficient manner and not rely continually just on cars. We also have to be aware, with all due respect to the growth of electric vehicles and now electric buses, that is also going to be impacting the RTA revenue. So there has to be an opportunity for us to address that as well. And I realize that people who have electric cars celebrate them, and they should. They should. They're forward-thinking individuals, but the roads still need to be maintained, and that opportunity to actually support our transportation areas need to be supported as well, because they go hand in hand. So we have to remain somewhat flexible on how that is going to be moved forward into the future. So this seems like the trains always run, but they only run with our support. And I would like you all to pay careful attention to what's happening with this, because there's millions and millions of dollars at stake. And we want to make sure that we continue to have adequate transportation and robust transportation opportunities here for Kane County. So that's my comment. Yes, please.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Combs.
Gumsy, I have a quick question for you. As it relates to Metra, their ridership pre-pandemic, are we, we're not at full ridership pre-pandemic. Do you know what the estimated ridership, I mean, what do they estimate? Because I have read different stories. So some say Metra don't anticipate we'll ever get back to that number, and some say we will.
Yeah, I would say based on some of the work that we've done closely with Metra is that they're expecting over the next 5 or so years to continue to be at 80% of what that 2019 number is. So that's really where that $730 million gap comes from. But in addition, there's increasing costs of labor through their union contracts that we have. So I would say 85% seems to be like a reasonable number. I don't have a crystal ball. The buses have been the most resilient throughout this process because they've been able to, you know, unlike fixed rail, they've been able to be responsive, rethink their routing and pick more people up. And so they've seen numbers, return Pace's numbers are very high in the 90s, I believe. And then CTA, again, there's because they have rail and bus, their rail system is down as well, closer to 80, depending on the line. But the buses are a little bit higher.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? None? Well, we look forward to getting your report in September.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time on the agenda. I really appreciate it.
Oh, the one, I think,
Is it too late?
No,
no, not.
not gone.
Speaking of electric cars, do you picture looking into that crystal ball that you say you don't have? Will there be something more like a mileage per car per year or something like that for?
A lot of states are looking at that mileage per car per year or vehicle mileage charged by the mile, something that maybe when you went in for your emissions testing, you could get checked. So a number of states are piloting it. Oregon's probably the most advanced, but also in this latest federal infrastructure bill that was passed in 2021, is that they want to do a national pilot that they're supposed to be standing up. I know they're delayed in that, but I do think that it's not coming tomorrow, but I do think that that helps plant the seeds for how that moves forward in maybe the next decade.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Erin. Well done. All right, since we have some other professional staff who is waiting for us, I'd like to bring up Roger and talk about the health department. And Michael.
All right, so Blair's going to get a couple of slides together for us. We only have a few. This is not to be kind of a comprehensive overview for master planning, but one of the things I wanted to touch on is that as we've been going through the master planning process with White and Company, and we have Jason Dwyer from White and Heidi Files from our project team here as well, is that, you know, we're starting to narrow in on certain scenarios that are common to all the offices, departments, and also through the board. I think those are kind of starting to narrow, and we're looking at things like location, programs, services, capacity, size, all the different types of requirements that will be essential to a good plan. In that process, identifying the priorities, certain things seem to rise to the top. I think we all are familiar with challenges from, the health department, the need for space in certain judicial offices or certain attorney offices. There's also issues, I think, here with the government center with providing public service and accessibility and ADA. So we're looking at all of those things. We also have kind of looked at some opportunities that might be short-term opportunities that are high priority and potentially have funding sources or the availability of funding sources that are currently available to the county. We're still looking at that. This is by no means, a request or any type of a directive. We're just trying to look at what types of interest there is from the board in taking additional planning steps related specifically to the health department. So one of the things I wanted to also mention, and Heidi was mentioning this earlier, there's the facilities master planning workshop that's going to be a special committee of the whole. It's on August 9th. I believe it's at 3 p.m. And they're going to do that at Eagle Brook again. So if you haven't marked your calendars, August 9th, 3 p.m. at Eagle Brook, they're going to do another session. This is primarily to start working on those scenarios and priorities and getting those tuned in. So tonight we're going to talk about the health department facility briefly. And what I want to focus on are some of the conditions and things that we feel are going on with the building from a building maintenance perspective. That's why I'm up here. And then Michael about some of the services and the programs and things that they are trying to offer and how that's, related to COVID and the pandemic and the things that have come out of that. And then there's also some other kind of tertiary or secondary services, things that are related to programs and services in the county that we're going to talk about, things like CASA and we have a Child Advocacy Center. There's a neutral drop-off type of exchange that people have talked about. But how does that fit with, the master plan and some of the things that are going on? And then what would be some potential funding sources or ways that we could go about doing those things in a shorter term versus longer term plan? Some of the master plan obviously is really large, big dollars, takes some significant financial work to figure out. Some of them might be within our capacity to reach and get those moving sooner. Again, no directive. It's just we're trying to figure out where these are at, and we're just going to give you some status on that. So the current facility in Aurora, that's a picture of it.
We have one question.
Roger, I was expecting your first slide to be, remember the Roadrunner, the Acme,
Yes,
boom, and
we can get that slide 3. No,
okay.
right? Okay. And I'm sorry, we've been going through this today, so some of these are a little fresh to us, but I will try to get through them in a reasonable time. So the health department, approximately 75 full-time employees, 22,800 some square feet. I think if you ask any of them, if anybody's walked the building, you'll determine that they need space. There's just trouble with all the programs and services and providing the services that the public need. There are some condition issues. We have some pictures, but in general, the condition by our building assessment was poor. So there's a lot of work to be done in a building that's relatively old. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, this building was purchased from the hospital across the street on Highland. I think it was around 2003, 2004. And at that time, the building was in need of repairs and renovation to even make it operational. I think the building was approximately $1.2 million in the condition that it was in then. So, it doesn't meet a lot of current building codes. It's not that it's not grandfathered in. It's certainly occupied and has occupancy. It is not fully ADA accessible. In fact, it's not ADA accessible probably in most areas, certainly not in the restrooms and public areas. There's a lot of challenges. The main parking lot from the back of the building where everybody would park for the building involves a concrete vaulted staircase that goes down to the lower level. So if you want to enter the health department on the main floor, you got to go all the way around the building to the front. And, the front is I think a valet drop off from the old medical center that used to be. there's not a fire suppression system throughout the offices. There is some targeted fire suppression in some mechanical spaces. And then finally, working with our architect, the building was not purpose built. It was a small professional office building that was associated with the hospital. So they had dentists and doctors, and most of it's off hall access directly to an office or a suite. So that's kind of the style of the building. And again, I think that the main thing is the poor condition and the accessibility and ADA. So I think everybody from our master planning sessions has identified this as, if not the highest priority, it's one of the top three. It's in that realm. I think because of the nature and connection to health and COVID and the pandemic, it has some interesting funding possibilities. And that's probably, the extent of where we're at with that. We've talked with finance, Kathy Hopkinson's met with us. We've talked with, the architect and planners. We still have a lot of work to do. We've met with the state's attorney's office and the folks with the ARP. And I think there's still a lot of questions. So we're still trying to flesh that out to see what types of opportunity you have there. In terms of condition, these are things that have been treated or in different stages of remedy, but this gives you an idea of the kind of operational things that happen month to month, whether it's, maybe a mold, a lot of it's household mold just from water and heat, but then you have plumbing issues, you have leak in and poor sealed windows and fascia that needs to be replaced and repaired. We did, I think it was 4 rooftop units on the building recently, just repairing them and rebuilding them with compressors. There's still maybe another 7, I think, on the building that would need to be addressed. But again, carpeting being replaced from different damage. And this is one of those buildings in poor condition, requires a lot of reinvestment. So that's something that we're contemplating is, we determine whether this is a long-term asset or not. If you're going to determine as a policy, this is a long-term asset, we need to start putting more money into it to renovate and repair it. Or we need to make a policy decision that we're going to look at a new building, or whether you purchase a building and renovate it or you build a new building. Those are kind of on the table. But one of the things that we also talked about, which I'll let Michael speak to, is the demand for services. And I think Michael can speak to this better than I can. So.
Good afternoon, everyone. Michael Isaacson, Executive Director for the Health Department. Actually, when I left the building today, I was parked next to a mold remediation vehicle because they're in our office again, taking care of a mold issue. So even though these are issues that can be addressed, they happen too frequently. Talking about the need for services, many of you have been around know that every 3 years we do a comprehensive community health assessment. From that, we work with our community partners. This is done in coordination with our 5 hospitals and the mental health board down in Southern King County. We identify our top health issues. This most recent community health assessment was actually done during COVID. So we started to get an idea about what the overall impact was on things beyond just people being infected with the disease, but really gathering data about what was happening. Additionally, we've been working with our team and all of our different programs for a project like this to look at as part of the space planning process. What do we need 10 years from now? What do we need 20 years from now? So for each of our programs, we've been trying to project what we need in terms of staff, how many clients we think we're going to have in these different areas. So just a couple items up here. I've talked about some kind of terminal data points. We've seen increases in suicide. We've seen increases in fatal overdoses. Certainly the pandemic had a exacerbating impact on youth mental health. So we're seeing more kids who are trying to avoid school, more substance use, more thoughts of suicide, more anxiety. Anxiety is unfortunately through the roof. So this is something that's much bigger. Food insecurity has become a much bigger problem in our community now. So I know you have community organizations who come in and speak to you about that. Homelessness nationwide, but in Kane County too. It's hard to find affordable housing. So we have more people who have those pressures of finding someplace to live. And that has a dramatic impact on both their physical and their mental health. Senior services, the health department has not invested in that historically. So that's something where there's a lot of capacity. We have needs, and there's areas where we could introduce more programming to better help our residents. Over on the right-hand side, we just listed a few of the things, especially for newer members, that we do on an ongoing basis. So we have staff that are responding. We have about 100 reportable diseases in Illinois that we have to follow up on and try to make sure that people are protected and that the people around them are protected. We provide supports to families. If you've heard me talk very much, I think investing in early childhood and things that we can do to best support our families, that's the best investment we can make in our future, period. Food safety, we have a new USDA code that's just come out that has ratios for how many inspectors we have per food establishment. And we're at about 30% of where we should be. So as we look 10 years into the future, once we start opening more restaurants and building starts up, we're going to need to grow so that we can assure we have food safety in our community. We have tremendously old housing stock in Kane County, which is cool in a lot of ways, but it also means there's a lot of lead paint. So our staff keeps very busy with following up on families where we have children with lead poisoning. We have well and septic. We have our public health nurses doing a variety of different programs, doing excellent work out there. And then we don't have a space where we can convene people. And this is a county-wide thing where we could have 100 people come in for a training center. This can be things that we're doing for emergencies. It could be things that we're doing on an ongoing basis for staff development. And I think there's tremendous opportunities for this across a bunch of different departments.
Michael Tepe here. I have two questions for you, which are probably intertwined, okay?
I'm sorry, Mr. Tepe, can we let them do their presentation first? And if you can just table this, I'd appreciate it. And then we can have questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll remember them.
We'll have to do some tag team on that. I think one of the things about Michael's slides that's really important is how does that tie or relate to COVID and the ARP funding? Because those are some of the things that we're being asked about and trying to make those connections. I think some of us, we see all those things. Those are obviously, exacerbated, like Michael said, by the pandemic, but that they're, connections and some type of supporting documentation and some research that has to go in to connect everything. And we're going to work on that. But in looking at the building as it sits now, I think I mentioned earlier, it's 22,000 some odd square feet in the current building. Our current space needs assessment and programming is looking at 34,000 square feet. And that extends out to 25, to $30 million approximately in a building to build a new health department building. We'll talk about renovating or the costs of demo and reno and adding space to the current building. But, if you add in the conference and training center at 4,300 square feet, you're somewhere in that $30 million to $33 million range. We'd also brought up topics like I had mentioned earlier, the crisis and social services, neutral exchange, the Child Advocacy Center. If you're not familiar with it, it's in two houses behind 3rd Street Courthouse. One of them, I think, was built in the 40s and the other one was built sometime in 2000s. But those also are bursting at the seams and dealing with probably some of the most vulnerable people in the county. And then you have CASA, which is in the 3rd Street Courthouse. We've been dealing with trying to identify space for CASA. They lease in the courthouse, but we'd like to see them in a permanent home. And I believe a lot of the functions of what CASA is doing is actually supported at the Judicial Center now instead of 3rd Street. So we need to even get it to a different potential location. So those are also pieces of the puzzle that we're not sure if they fit in the health department. They seem like they serve similar populations, but we need to try to figure out exactly how that would look in terms of a building or multiple entrances. People have to be provided space to do the type of service and program they need.
Roger, just for perspective, what was the square footage of the multi-use facility?
Oh, it was 56,000 square feet.
I was just trying to give it some scale. That's all.
Yeah, so 56,000 versus about 35 to 40,000 square feet and a different finish, I would say. The multi-purpose building that we built, 30,000 square feet of it was a garage. So it was large open space versus finished office. But those are some of the types of things that we've been working on. It gives you kind of the magnitude, the rough order of magnitude of the cost of the building. Couple of things that have come out of this, and I was talking about the scenarios. This is one of the things that'll be discussed at the August 9th meeting. It's really important that we understand we only really have the current site where the building is on 1240 Highland, and that would be demolition, renovation, addition, some building on the site. We have to run the health department while we actually do that. So might have to look at other office space while you do the work on the current site. But maybe more likely is that you have Judicial Center or Fabian Parkway site. Those are two prime examples of a location where a facility like the health department could go in the other services. So those are the two scenarios that White and Company and Heidi are working on discussing at the August 9th meeting. Again, going back to the comparisons, this was just off the cuff, rough order of magnitude, kind of working with White and Company, the existing building to renovate versus additions, and then the main building itself. So the right side is like renovation costs in big round numbers. You're probably in 24 to 27 million. And then, building a new building at 34,000 square feet is in that 25 to 30 million. And I know a lot of people are like, well, it can't cost as much to renovate an old building as it does to build a new one. But when we go into old buildings, we have to do demolition and we have to bring everything back up to code, which means you're taking out a lot of material and a lot of systems and bringing them up to code. And then to get additional space, we have to add additional space to a building and open the building. So there's some additional types of work beyond the construction. There's like this demolition and retrofitting mechanical systems that has to happen. And then the last piece is we don't have a training center, so we'd have to build that or add that as a space to the building too. So new versus renovation starts to look very similar in terms of the costs. It's maybe a little bit less expensive to renovate, but it's marginally the same. And I think that's important to understand. We don't have, really definitive costs. These are still rough costs. We're going to get closer to what the real costs are as we go through this, as we get more detailed about the different options, scenarios, locations, and the direction from the policymakers, what type of buildings and services you want. It'll start to narrow down. But those are the comparisons just for your consideration. We've been talking about, the American Rescue Plan and the funding options. We know there's challenges in justifying and answering all the questions to get the funding set up through ARP. There's also some, reserve funds. There's the potential for other funding sources. We're open to suggestions. We're looking for, the support to try and build a case to get something like this moving. We think it's within reach. It's certainly more within reach than some of the $100 million building and infrastructure that is involved with the government center and the judicial center. But we wanted to bring that to you. We're here to answer questions. The next step, if we were to move forward with something, would be to get basically like a concept and a site plan together. But I think that's a little premature until we get policy direction. I think August 9th, that meeting will help us tremendously with getting some of that direction put together and bringing it back for a decision. We are pursuing the scenario and narrative for an ARP application related to this, just to see if we can get the narrative down on paper and see if our friends in the state's attorney's office and the ARP program manager and the folks in the Ernst & Young can work with us to see if this is an eligible project. So we are open to ideas. We're open to suggestions. I think that's all we have for presentation. Happy to try to answer any questions. That
Mr. Tepe has been waiting.
Yes, thank you. Can you go back to that slide which had
Sure.
those points on there?
Oh.
Right there. Kind of two questions, as I said, intertwined. One is. to
Mr.
what
Tepe, Mr. Tepe, microphone.
Hello, hello.
Very-
I'll get closer. Can't believe I'm not loud enough. Okay. To what extent do these services need to be centralized versus decentralized? Because delivering services throughout the county can be a challenge. Okay. And second, you in particular have done a phenomenal job in working with outside organizations to provide some of these services. Does that create a challenge of either requiring more space or less space?
Yeah, those are both excellent questions. I think no matter what we end up doing with this conversation, we're going to need some small space in both Aurora and in Northern King County, most likely in Elgin, so that we can provide optimal customer service. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to share space with other county departments. Because I'm thinking if people are bringing in plans, currently, we have somebody at our front desk in our Elgin office on Tuesday. So if you come in on Monday or Wednesday or Thursday or Friday, there's not somebody at that front desk to serve you. We only have them up there one day a week. So we need some kind of presence. In terms of working with other partners, I think that some of the things that we're looking at, and this is like Roger said, if we look at really what we're going to need for this, I'm looking for a little direction on this as well. So now I don't have space. So we wouldn't grow into more programs with current space. We wouldn't be able to do that. If we had some additional space, I think there's opportunity for us. Still, our model is very much working with our community partners. We've been very successful with that. I think some of the benefit is that we're perceived as being a neutral party because we're not in competition with our partners. So I'd like to continue that track. We actually met with our health advisory board this morning, where we have several of the federally qualified healthcare centers. Executive directors are on that board, and we had an open conversation with them about that. We don't want to go into direct competition with people who are already providing the service, but what we're finding is that there are a lot of services where people are falling through the gaps. There's opportunities for the county to step in. At Public Health Committee, I talked a little bit about more family supports and working with parents as peers. That's something that's potentially reimbursable by Medicaid. Other people aren't doing that. That's an example of something that the health department could pick up. We'd need space to do that. It does have a sustainable model with funding, but it wouldn't be competing with somebody else. And then I think there's other opportunities, just using mental health as an example, again, around case management, where some of those things aren't being done at the level between the different organizations, where that's a role that the health department's a natural to be able to step in and fill that. So good question.
Mr. Surges.
Michael, thanks for all you do. If we said 34,000 square feet is kind of the ideal, but we were looking to maybe decentralize and go one Aurora, one Elgin, are you suggesting that you need 34,000 in each location, or you can split that in half and 34,000 is about the typical space of a Best Buy store? Is 34,000 feet.
Best Buy is
A
34.
Best Buy is typically 32,000.
Rule of thumb.
So,
Okay.
just to let you know.
Yeah, no, that's another great question. I think what we're looking at, and again, we're looking for guidance, centralizing the administrative unit with most of our staff, and then those satellites would actually just be a handful of people. So I think
Okay.
that's why there's opportunity for them to partner up with others, but we could have flexibility. We've talked about this for a long time, so we just wanted to get something in front of you to say, yes, do this, or maybe start asking questions in that direction.
Gotcha.
So, yeah,
Thanks, Mike.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Doherty's been on hold, waiting for me. Yes, Mr. Doherty, recognize you.
Thank you. Michael, I just need clarification. You said you only have somebody at the front desk one day a week.
In the Elgin office, that is correct.
So how would more space change that?
Well, I just got here, so I'm working on growing that right now. We haven't been able to do it yet, but also that's why I mentioned we have opportunities. I think would to partner up with other county departments where we could have a shared cost to have common people at a front desk, where instead of all of us paying to have somebody at multiple front desks, perhaps if we were co-located, we'd only be paying for one person with multiple departments. So that's what I was referencing with that, Mr. Doherty.
Okay, thank you. I was confused. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Doherty. Ms. Bates?
Yeah, this looks great. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Fransak. I am thinking, so Mr. Caius and I had a wonderful tour for Mr. Isaacson just a few days ago, perfect timing. And we talked a lot about the vision and the future of the health department. Maybe 34,000 isn't enough. And we need to work out what we really are asking of you in the future.
Yeah, and I don't have expertise in how much square footage per person. It's been excellent to work with White and Co. and depending on Roger and Heidi Files. As we're looking at, I think again today that whatever feedback we get, and like Roger said, I think our next session is going to be helpful. If there's an appetite to move forward with something like this, that changes how we approach our planning. So we're trying to be aggressive with our planning, but if it's a non-starter, I also want to be realistic with my staff in terms of how do we shoot for the stars, but have something that's attainable too. So if that makes sense.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Along the lines of my colleague Bates' question, I had the same question. If we can go to the next slide, please. Oh, you're fine. Thank you. So
The next one.
the next one, please. Thank you so much, Blair. I was wondering if you could refresh my memory on the history, because as I'm hearing you say, we moved into this building in 2003.
2003.
In
correct.
2003, and I'm thinking, and it was an improvement
It was
over
a-
the building
it
we
was a
had
dramatic
before,
improvement, Yes.
right? So we're actually doing better, but so in 20 years, what was the square footage of, and we were tight back then. What was the square footage of that older building? Anybody know?
Isn't that in the basement?
Yeah, I don't.
Probation
I-
offices.
Yeah,
I can
about,
share that. So if you're familiar with the Sixth Street School, they were located in the basement of the Sixth Street School, the one that was demolished and turned into the Geneva Library. So the Regional Office of Education occupied the top 2 or 3 floors, I think, and then the basement is like a half, above ground, but it was in the lower level. It was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 8,000 usable square feet,
okay,
7,
so very small.
pretty small with a lot of interrupted space.
So that's actually my question along with my colleague Bates is that are we looking ahead? It's only been 20 years and we've massively outgrown this building, even though it's significantly bigger. So are we looking ahead for the next 20 years and addressing all the needs that are to come, which are probably only going to get higher?
I think that the space needs assessment that was done by White kind of spells that out for us, and that's what this was primarily based on. We're not done yet, but given what types of program services and people are brought out of the master planning process for facilities, that might change a little bit. And if you add some of these other types of services, it's going to change more dramatically. And then the other part of it is certain types of programmatic things that were eliminated from the health department during that period or brought on. And then it's kind of trade space and things get, more and things less. But certainly this was considering the interview and the questions that were asked for space needs assessment were brought forward into those numbers.
I guess I would just like to say that in just logically thinking, in my opinion, we probably need something bigger. So I want to compare apples to apples as far as renovating this building versus needing something that's even bigger and more expensive than this. So that if we, and I get it, we don't have all the answers yet, but it looks to me like in 20 years, we outgrew the space pretty fast and
Yeah.
pretty massively, that in another 20 years, we may
Yeah.
need more than
I
this.
I think one of the things is the geography and getting landlocked into a location is a challenge. In the health department at 1240 Highland, you have no space to really expand because it's the parking lot that you use. So that's a challenge. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just designing it. You have limited amount of space to add. Let's say you add 10 to 15,000 square feet of space on that lot right now. You're really going to be challenged to accommodate all that. So then if you look at the Judicial Center campus in St. Charles or the Fabian location in Geneva, there's 125 acres at Judicial Center and 45 acres, I think, at the Fabian campus. Lots of room. You could have a building and a footprint for an annex or another. So there's some different flexibility that comes with those other locations. And they're also far more centralized. So the main health department now in Aurora to have a central office that's, near other government offices and government services, there's some synergy there, but also, if you're looking for the main health department right now, if you're in the north part of the county, you're probably 30 to 45 minutes to go to the main health department. They do not offer all the same services and programs at the branch office in Elgin. A lot of those are inspections and things that they do in the community, but they don't have their program staff. So that's another challenge with having it all in Aurora.
true. If I may, the community members that I have spoken to who live both in the Aurora and Elgin area have come up and said having a central location, which would be central Kane County, it would be convenient for them because that way they can all come together to meet.
Seems fair.
Are there any other questions? Oh, yes.
Thank
Lisa.
you. Grumps here. I have thoughts. I mean, you guys are both here looking for direction, so I have thoughts. I agree with my colleagues. I don't think that your 34,000 is gonna cut it. That's just my opinion. But I do have some questions. So have we done a property search, commercial property search? Like, we have lots of properties in the county that are sitting vacant and they're not very old. The companies have gone out of business. So that would be, I would lean that direction. I have no desire to rehabilitate that nasty building. Just FYI, that's just my opinion. If it's got mold, it's never going away. Just tear it down. But that's just my personal opinion. So that would be something that I would, and I, I just did a quick search and I found a lot of things. So
Sure.
that looked beautiful.
That's something that I think as a policy, when you get into making, the direction. One of the challenges we have is the purpose-built buildings that are designed for their programs and services and the public waiting. So you get into the building that we're in now is a used building and it wasn't purpose-built. And we're stumbling through a lot of the things to fix or to renovate, or what do we do to it? And even a gently used building will have those kinds of requirements too. Maybe not as severe as what we have there. There's, reference properties. I think there's a property just on the corner of Kirk and Fabian that's about 50,000 square feet. And it's a very interesting office building, but it's office and it's got a lot of amenities that we would never use, and we'd have to figure out how to redesign it. So you're back to renovating it again, or, you kind of say, I'll take it as is and just kind of live with it without it being built for purpose. And I think that's been one of our struggles is we get into something, thinking we can make it something that is not. And we struggle with that and it becomes a constant battle. And then this building we've lived with for 20 years. And I don't think that it's from day one, they had trouble with ADA accessible restrooms. And I can tell you a story about that, but I won't say it on air, It was just not very.
Beep, beep, beep.
Yeah, it was not a nice experience, but I can share that if anybody would like to hear it afterwards.
Okay, I just think that's a great thing to look at. Gums again.
Yeah.
Just a for sale, newer, I mean, I don't want an old building for you guys. I want something nice that we can grow into. And they're there, so I hear you, Roger.
Yep.
I don't disagree with you, but if you haven't looked, and
Yeah.
I mean, don't rule that out because you might find something that's truly amazing and has more than you want. That's reasonable. So I don't want you to lock that out of your brains because
Nope.
we want to, personalize our space because you might find something that has way more than you want for less. Just throwing that out there.
Don't disagree.
I think that's a smart idea. We have to make sure that we do the cost analysis on any future structure because we do know, and I'm sure you know very well, Ms. Gums, that the health department has special requirements that are needed. The TB clinic is one of them, and that has got to be very special and handled uniquely for the obvious reasons. We also know that CASA's lease is finite and that CASA will be asked to leave unless we go through the review again after a period of time. And I think as a policy, we've all agreed here as a board that CASA is part of our family of services, that we at least provide space for them. At least that's my understanding of how the board feels. So they would also have to be provided appropriate space. And right now their court has been rebuilt. So they're no longer in the Third Street Courthouse. The courthouse that they're using is at the Judicial Center. So it'd be that having access to that is for all the right services, it would be appropriate. So, but you are right, and taking a look at the cost is critically important.
Sure.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. August 9th, 3 p.m. All right, we have two more, and then, no, these will be short as well, and then we can go into our executive session. Kathy Hopkinson, please.
Hello, good afternoon. The first presentation is on the Local Government Distributive Fund. A few bits of information about how this fund works. So this fund was set up back starting in 1969 when the income tax, the state income tax, came into existence in the state of Illinois. And this fund, the state income tax, some portions of local use tax, and now the cannabis regulation tax are deposited into this fund, this local government distributive fund. And it's all pooled into this fund. It's collected from all over the state. So state income taxes collected across the state, local use taxes collected across the state, and cannabis regulation taxes collected from dispensaries across the state. This is not our local King County cannabis tax. This is state cannabis regulation. They also call it the cannabis excise tax. All of these taxes are deposited into this fund, and then they are distributed to the counties across the state based on population. And that population is the population figure they use is from the census. They can make adjustments if there's a special formal request put in, but there's a lot of hoops to go through, but generally they're using the latest census population numbers. So when the county receives these funds, and when we receive the funds from the LGDF, they come in individual separate payments to the county. The state income tax that we receive, and I'll go into the percentages on the next few slides. But the state income tax and the local use taxes that we receive as from this local government distributive fund are deposited into our general fund. The cannabis tax, again, this is the state cannabis tax, is deposited into a special fund, which the sheriff's office has to use because the requirements of how these funds are used is specific to improving public safety. So again, there's three pieces, three forms of revenue that are being deposited into the local government distributed fund. The state income tax percent that is deposited into this fund is coming from three sources. It's coming from income taxes on individuals, trusts, and estates, income taxes on corporations, and more recently, income taxes on electing pass-through entities, which are us corporations and partnerships and the like. So as part of the state's budget over the years, they are setting the percentage of those state taxes that they will deposit into the local government distributive fund. So as part of the state's 2024 budget that was just passed, beginning August 1st, 2023, the percent of these three income taxes that will be deposited into the local government distributive fund are as follows: 6.4% of individual income tax, 6.85% for corporations, and 6.47% for the pass-through entities. And I have just a little history of the most recent years so you can see the increases. And this is if you read about it, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, this is a hot topic over the years with a lot of cities and counties related to, what should be their percent share of the state income taxes. Thanks to the Illinois Department of Revenue website, this slide here represents the total distributions made out of the local government distributed fund to counties across the state and municipalities. So for 2023 to date, again, and this is the state fiscal year. It says right there. This is the state fiscal year. So the state fiscal year ends June 30th. So through June 30th, the state distributed nearly $2 billion in income taxes out of the LGDF to municipalities and counties. So the second piece of tax revenue that is being deposited into this LGDF is the local use tax. Going to do a high level on this because there's lots of sales tax rates depending upon what you're buying. But essentially, this is a type of a sales tax. So this is a tax imposed on the user of tangible personal property. The state rates for the use tax are 6.25% on general merchandise and 1% on qualifying food, drugs, and medical appliances. Of those local use taxes, a portion of that tax is deposited into the LGDF. So what portion? 16% of that 6.25%, you gotta be good with numbers. 16% of that 6.25% is deposited into the LGDF, and then 100% of that 1%. So again, all of these pieces are being deposited into this pool, this LGDF pool. And again, thanks to the Illinois Department of Revenue website, for the state fiscal year to date. Blair, I think there's something on the. Thanks. To date, $412 million in use taxes have been deposited into the LGDF for distribution to local governments. And now the cannabis regulation tax. So this is a tax on all adult use cannabis sales. The funds must be used for public safety, for crime prevention programs, et cetera. 8% of the state's cannabis tax is deposited into the LGDF fund. I have a chart here that has the distributions received by King County over the years. The 2023 line is obviously, it's a little short because we haven't finished out. This is the county's fiscal year. We haven't finished out the fiscal year yet, but you will see on that, the top line there, that's the income tax portion of the LGDF that the county has received. So over time, when you look at the history of the taxes that they've applied, the addition of the taxes on the S corporations and the partnerships really caused a jump in the income tax portion that goes into this fund. The use tax has gradually increased over the years. As far as the state cannabis tax and the disclosure, I know you're very familiar with the fact that the cannabis revenue has not been disclosed over the years. And I think it's important to distinguish between the state cannabis tax and the local cannabis tax. I've been looking into, whether we can disclose the state cannabis tax. And It looks very positive that we can do that. I'm just checking with our friends over here from the state's attorney's office. But I believe that we can disclose, in a short period of time, we should be able to disclose the cannabis revenues that we're getting from the state in a setting like this. And just on a side note, we're also going to soon be able to disclose the local cannabis tax. As of April 2023, based on the information that I have, there are now 5 dispensaries in Kane County. And once you reach 5, you can publicly disclose the revenues. So just have to figure out when that clock starts ticking on when their revenue comes in, but I think we'll be able to disclose that soon. And I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, sir.
Surges, what's the big deal with telling us what the taxes are? I don't get, why is it all like secret squirrel stuff?
Because it's illegal federally.
So I think the issue is more so with the local cannabis tax, and the thinking is that if you have 4 or less dispensaries, that if you're disclosing that information, it may provide some insight into the activities of where those dispensaries are located.
You could generate.
Isn't it? Madam Chair?
Yes, but this, I think it's really important, the sales tax. But I think we should be cognizant of what they're trying to cut and the distribution of this revenue and how it could possibly impact the county. It used to be at 10%. And I think Mr. Berman can speak with that, but Ms. Bates, please. you had a
Could we
comment.
go back to the slide that has the percentages on there? Because I don't, Blair, could you do that? Move us back a couple slides to.
I should be able to do that.
Stop, go
Oh,
back.
that one?
Go
Yeah.
back down. I don't understand this. This is 6% of what?
Of the total state income tax. So
The
6
state
point,
takes in $100 million and they give out 6 million.
so
That's all.
6.47% of state income taxes on individuals, trusts, and estates is deposited into the local government distributive fund for further distribution
To the counties.
to the counties based on population.
And this used to be 10%.
That's it.
That's it. Yes, yes.
The answer is it was 10% when it was originally Berman here. The other thing is the tax on weed. It's similar to what the state does in the state sales tax by individual corporations, individual businesses. They don't disclose. We don't disclose what that is to everyone.
Right. So for all the taxes, we don't disclose, what retail establishment is. But we're not interested in disclosing how much is coming from each dispensary. I think the issue is, can we disclose the total amount of revenue received? Right. And that's where it's a little tricky. I think we'll be able to disclose both state and county cannabis information soon.
And yes, Ms. Bates, yes.
So are we doing something about this 6% to try to get back up to 10%? Is this a
Yes.
legislative? Is there a bill? Is there a
Priority.
pressure on this?
I think we've got a double-handed.
Well,
here,
obvious.
Stumps.
We work on this really hard and have been working on it really hard to get it back up to that 10%. It's on, I think, on every single county's platform to make that happen. We've talked about it many times. We refer to it as the LGDF. Consistently, we speak to our legislators.
This is a NACO, you mean? or I-
No, this is
Yes,
us, the county.
Cross counties.
You've talked about it before. You've advocated to raise that. So this is not something that, every single thing we do tries to get that back to the 8 or the 10%.
You can see it went up.
A little bit, yeah.
It has gone up. There is one bit of legislation for the 1% on food and other medical supplies. I believe there's current legislation asked to remove that so that groceries would cost less. But it's again, a policy issue that is going to be with the state legislature. Yes, that 1% may reduce that cost, but that 1% is less revenue that goes directly to our municipalities and to our county.
So, Madam Chair, so during COVID or some emergency situation, we took away that 1%, right? There was a sign up at the Jewel until a certain date, there'd be 0% sales tax on food, but that money was only hurting the counties.
Well, and municipalities.
I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe when the state discontinued that, they still made the local government distributed fund whole for the counties.
Oh, okay, good.
They did.
Oh, good. All right.
But that's no longer the case because they had the COVID money to be able to make up the arrears. That's correct. So I know that there was some questions about what this is about. So I asked Kathy, so that everyone could get an understanding of what this distributive fund, local distributive fund is what it is and what it's made up of. And that's why I asked her if she could present this. Yes, Mr. Caius.
Just one question in English, what is electing pass-through entities?
Partnerships, S corporations.
Okay, Ms. Bates, because we got one more presentation.
Okay. Oh, just one more pass. What is a use tax? I still don't quite understand.
It's this, a sales tax.
Sales tax,
essentially,
okay.
Essentially.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions on this? Everybody got this? And you have the presentation here as well that you'll be able to refer to. All right, next, please.
The next topic is on budgeting for vacant positions.
This is a weird one.
A very diverse presentation today. And as we're getting the slides loaded here, I will say at the outset that a lot of what we're doing here applies to the entire county, all departments and elected offices in the county, but there are some specific things that I'll be mentioning that are just for the departments and not the elected offices. Okay. So we kicked off our budget process last Thursday with a kickoff meeting for the departments. We're holding our kickoff meeting for the elected offices this Thursday. And so there's a few slides in here that we presented to the departments. And I'm just going to give an overview to sort of set the stage for where we're going with what we're asking of the departments to do in terms of vacant positions that they may have. So as part of building the budget, obviously some key themes are financial stability, oversight and transparency. We're providing services while trying to balance revenues and expenses. We want to make sure that we have reserves so we can do capital projects and other things. The county board has the review and approval of the budget. Public comment is also an aspect of the budget process. So the public gets an opportunity to look at the budget every year. And transparency. Transparency is key in how we are using our resources. And we'll be looking at enhancing how we do our committee reports. There's typically a finance section of every committee report. We'll be looking at seeing if we can do a better job of presenting financial information instead of in addition to the standard, budget to actual reports, line item reports that are in those financial reports. As part of and I think that will help in the budget process. It'll help in the budget process throughout the year. You'll see the actions in place. Also, as part of transparency, there are a lot of things that we have to take into consideration as we do the budget, obviously adhering to state statutes, county codes, and county policies. And I tell people that this is one of my favorite charts that I've taken with me throughout my career. I take it everywhere I go. It's just a good way to think about, At the top of the pyramid is an organization's mission. And underneath the mission, you have specific goals and objectives that you're trying to achieve. And all of our departments and elected officials have specific and unique goals and objectives. Underneath that are specific actions that they're taking to achieve those goals and objectives. And how do they do that? They do that with resources, revenues, people, process, and technology. And the guiding rails, the guiding framework for this is county board oversight and the state statutes, county code, and county policy. Okay, budget guidelines. We are, as part of the budget process this year, we are asking the departments to really look deeply and to consider efforts to reduce and or eliminate inefficiencies and provide cost savings. And without getting too in the weeds about the mechanics of how we are asking departments to complete their budgets, we are asking them to complete the budgets in 2 steps, which is different than how they've done it before. Step 1 is to take their 2013 budget and go through it and say what they, 2023. That would be sad for the departments. Yeah, if it was 2013, they would be crying. Take their 2023 budget, take a look at it. And then step 2 is what do they need in addition in terms of dollars? What do they need in addition to their 2023 budget, and show that separately? And I think that will be helpful to the board. I think in the past, everything was put together, and this way people can see changes from one year to the next more clearly. As part of that, we're asking departments, and this is where the focus is, we would be asking all departments to look at this. The elected officials included, we would be asking them to look at this, but we're going to be hopefully putting together an updated vacant position policy to bring to the board for departments that would include looking at how long you've had a vacant position in place. One of the opportunities that we are providing to departments is we're going to create 2 new line items in the budget, one for cost of living and one for merit pay. In the past, they've typically just had one line item for salaries. By line iteming out and separating out cost of living and merit pay, that will give flexibility to the departments to award merits where the department head feels it's due, but then separating out cost of living so that everybody in the department, non-union eligible employees, would receive cost of living separate from potential merit. And this is why it's key to look at vacant positions. Vacant positions can sometimes be in a department's budget for too long. And it may become too easy to just carry it forward every year. We will be asking departments to justify if they've had a vacant position for too long. And we're still tinkering with the period of time that we would want them to consider a vacant position no longer needed. We're also asking departments to really look at their performance metrics. There's a section of the budget book that every department fills out called mission and goals. I think in future years, we could probably really do a better effort in reporting outcomes and not just outputs. But for this year, we're kind of doing a light upgrade and asking departments to take a better look and do a better job at reporting their outcomes. In terms of policies, so there's financial policies, there's the new budget policy that was just put in place, there's purchasing policies, and there's human resources policies. To help us do a better job with our budget, having a vacant position policy would be very helpful. Also, there's also work on a compensation policy, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. And I just wanted to highlight how important it is to take a look at vacant position policies, compensation policies. So this slide represents all salaries and benefits for all funds since 2015, budget to actual. And I must say, one of the difficulties of being a finance person right now, the last 3 years are sort of an anomaly with COVID. Things are out of whack. It's hard to see trends over time because there was such a shock to the system. And I think it'll be a couple of years to sort of even it out. But just from taking a look at this, you can see some big differences between what was budgeted for salaries and benefits over the last couple of years and what was actually spent. And this slide is just for the general fund alone. And you can see some big gaps there. And I realized that there were budgets included in the last year or two for potential Safety Act implementation. So people are always asking about, well, what kind of policies do we have now? What policies do surrounding governments have? So the only policy that Kane County has right now related to vacant positions actually doesn't really have to do with vacant positions so much. It has to do with what happens if you have a vacant position. And it says if you have a vacant position and you have totally delegated the duties to other people and they are now doing much more work than they're supposed to be doing, there is something called temporary pay that can be given to them until that vacant position is filled. So our current policies really don't address being able to justify holding a vacant position for long periods of time. The next couple of slides and the policy represent what our surrounding counties are doing. And it's really different. They're all very different. In fact, I'm not going to read them all, but Lake County, in their budget development policy, they indicate that if a position is vacant for 12 months, it's automatically eliminated during the budget process. DuPage gives discretion to the chief financial officer of the county to determine whether vacant positions can be budgeted. McHenry County has a policy with a very short duration. It says if the unfilled or vacant position is not filled within 90 days, meetings need to be scheduled and they're moved through the process. Will County allows the budgeting for vacant positions, but again, every effort should be made to reduce headcount. I think we're a little short even on that sort of language in our own King County policies. And then for Cook County, obviously a much larger county. I think the key there is in the last sentence. It says the budget director shall issue a report of approved position reclassifications to the county board on a quarterly basis for the preceding quarter. And then the previous paragraph, the county must obtain the prior, anybody who wants to hire somebody who's not in the budget must obtain the prior approval of the budget director. So again, various different policies in our surrounding counties, but at least there is a policy addressing what to do with vacant positions. So what's next? We are working on policies for vacant positions. Primarily, obviously, for the departments, not the elected officials. Policies that would take into consideration things like position control, ensuring that jobs have specific job descriptions and salary ranges. We're adding the cost of living line item, which would be distributed to all county employees, non-union eligible county employees. Putting in a merit line item, and obviously we would need to determine the size of the merit pool as part of the budget process itself. And the cost of living line item as well, that the amount that would be put into those lines and available for departments and elected officials would be determined as part of our budget process and where we come out. And then vacant positions, old vacant positions will require county, these are thoughts that we're looking into, that old vacant positions would require county board approval to be put back into a budget. So let's say a position's been vacant for multiple years. The department really could justify adding it back. There might be a process where they would have to come to the board to ask for it back. Departments will work with human resources to review job descriptions for new positions, and new positions that were identified in the middle of the budget process perhaps might require county board approval, which generally does occur already. So any questions?
Yes, Ms. Bates.
How many, Mavis Bates, how many vacant positions do we have right now?
So that's a moving target and something that we're trying to get a handle on. The biggest issue, to be very honest, it's a data issue. It's there's position numbers and position titles, and position titles can be changed and the number isn't changed. And so trying to get a handle on that is something that we're working on right now.
That's
Judging by the blue bar and the yellow bar, it looks like we've got like 1,000 vacant spots.
We have 1,300 people working for us.
Yes, but it looks like there's as many vacancies as there are. Look at the bars.
And can we?
Yeah.
Please go back to, please go back to the blue bars.
Oh, you've got control.
What?
All right, she's got control.
Okay.
There it is.
It looks like there's this, well, it's not quite as many, but there's almost as many. If I'm reading that correctly, the budget is twice as much as our actual, so.
Well, for 2023, we're not done yet.
Okay.
Right, so that's to date, so that's
right.
through
Good,
a couple weeks ago, right?
Okay,
Yeah, so
that's-
2023 is not finished, that's
Okay.
actual to date.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
Yes, Mr. Surtees.
On regarding the vacant policy, I thank you and applaud you for diving into this. At Human Resources, we've looked at this several times. I encourage you to work with Jamie Labrillo on this, as I'm sure you're doing already, but this is a major, I think this is a policy that we had the best of intentions when we put it forward, and there were unintended consequences later that we've realized. So thank you for doing this. In terms of the chart that was just pulled up, could I ask you to please prepare this, but remove the excess COVID funds from that so we can get a more representative
Fair.
sample of what that blue line might look like?
Yep.
I don't think that would be a Herculean task. We should be
Right.
able to subtract that out and just kind of see where we're at.
That's under contingency, so that should be pretty easy to
Yeah,
do.
I agree. I agree. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, yes, I'm sorry, Ms. Gumps.
Thank you.
you are.
Comes here. Hi there. Thank you for everything so far. Anyways, I do have a couple of questions. So, how did we come up with this chart if we don't know how many vacancies we have?
This is dollars.
Right, but
Dollars.
I mean,
So
you're-
we just ran the financial reports. We have the total dollars budgeted for personnel services, for salaries and benefits. And we have the total spent actual.
We just had crayons.
oh, you did this, but okay, fair.
Right.
And then, you know, you had mentioned like some of the policies were 12-month vacancies. I'm so opposed to that. Because it's a fluid event, right? To have a vacant position. It's all subjective. It's dependent on the position itself. How many people are applying, how you can live or not live without that position. And I give you the prime example is a 911 dispatcher. I worked there for 20 years. We were short for 20 years. We never, ever came up to the level we needed to be at. Our own dispatchers are short. So that has to be taken into consideration because that's just one department. There's a lot of departments and I understand the premise. I sure do, but how can we determine that
I think
for
that-
another department? I don't know how we can do that.
I think that's why we're looking at building into this process as part of the budget process, that it has to be presented to that department's home committee, parent committee. So that everybody's aware. And then that way it gives an opportunity for that department to talk about that specific issue.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair Silva. So yeah, along those lines, again, I would be very, very interested before moving forward in hearing more about what the department heads have to say. Because in Kane County, we have the unique quality or characteristic of sometimes not being able to offer the salaries as some of the counties that were comparable counties that were on displayed up there. And so some positions I can imagine probably in the public defender's office, for example, may be harder to recruit for and doesn't mean we don't need them. So I really would like to know what department heads have to say and kind of look at the flip side of the coin. Can we at some point eliminate these positions or are they just going to be hard to fill?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we've been talking about is, our departments, again, this would be something that a department would be presenting as part of their budget request. But perhaps showing it separately so that home committees are aware. But some of the things that we've been talking about include, are the departments actively recruiting for the positions? Have they met with, is there any possibility that job descriptions need to be reclassified somehow? Should the department be meeting with the Human Resources Department to figure out, could the job description be changed in any way to attract candidates?
I like that.
It's been very inclusive. Mr. Surges?
If I can, I think that one of the, I was trying to tap dance my way around this, but if we can. The problem, one of the challenges that came about is, and Monica, specific to you, or to your comments, if you are allowed to put a vacant position into your budget and then you carry that over a period of time, is the goal to really hire an individual to fill a vacant position, or is it to create enough budget space so that you have a little bit of a slush fund or a little bit of wiggle room there to use that someplace else? That's not what the vacancy was meant for. The vacancy was meant because we needed a person to fill maybe something in the communications, maybe somebody this or that. It wasn't meant to create an artificial bucket of money to be used for, budget emergencies. And maybe I'm mistaken on that, but that's my perception of what we're trying to remedy here. If you really need the position, then we should really budget for it and try and fill it. But if you need that position, that's like a 90-day thing. That's like a 6-month thing. That's not a year over year. We have all of these positions that we need to fill, and we're just leaving a place card, a placeholder, a reservation for it, but just give us the money in case, we would need to allocate. I don't know if I'm making that
No,
clear.
it
I'm
does
probably
make
making
sense.
enemies while I'm saying that, but
No, actually, that's what we're here for. And that's why I appreciate that middle ground.
right?
No, I'm sure there's department heads that will look at that and say the way he said it was very offensive. I don't mean it that way.
No, you just said the hard part.
Yeah, but I think
said the
that's what
hard
we're
part.
looking at and trying to say, how much of that is there? Because if there's only a little bit, who cares? But if this is like epic, then we should know that and we should be able to budget for it properly.
And that's one side of the equation. And I think the help from the finance office and human resources to see what are we doing wrong if we're actually trying to fill that position. My fear is that we could, if we put something in place where we could take away a position that's actually needed
Too far.
and the right to swing in the other direction.
Yeah, not the intention, but I'm sure we'll.
Madam Chair,
Oh, yes, please.
do we keep track of those vacant position salary amounts and whether or not they're used in the department budgets?
Again, to be very honest, it's a little tricky, because job titles change. And tracking a position from year to year. Some don't, some it's the same position, name, number and title year after year. Some the titles are changed. So it's not as easy as pushing a button and getting a report.
Yes.
Mavis Bates. I can see that it could be very possible for example, the Water and Environmental and Water Resources Department under the Energy and Environmental. So I'm showing my cards here that to find a technical person like a water engineer could easily take more than 12 months. So maybe, so I think it could happen that positions could be left open more than 12 months. When I remember this first coming up, I've been on the board about 2.5 years, was when the health department had some vacancies. This was a couple directors ago. And I think they were using that money for bonuses, which was not in the budget. So that's a tough call.
And that's why the thinking as some of these policies are being drafted is that a department should be actively recruiting. If they are having difficulties, they should be meeting with the human resources department to perhaps change the job somehow or change the salary range to address those exact questions.
Okay, I'm trying to be mindful of the
Right.
time. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one final thought. I totally agree with this policy. I think it provides us a certain level of transparency for our taxpayers. And I think it helps our department heads. I don't think it's going to hurt anybody. It's not saying, sorry, too late. You didn't fill it within 12 months. You can no longer have this position. It's saying, let's talk about it. What's going wrong? What's going right? What are you seeing as trends because you're interviewing these people? What are you seeing? Why are they going somewhere else? And it allows us as a board to have an open discussion about what's going on. There's a position on our website now that has been available since June 18th, 2021. Do we really need this position? Do we want to talk to the department head and find out what's going on with this position? It's not going to eliminate completely the need because it's not a stop here. It's a, well, if you do need it and you need it, in a year, you can bring it back up. It's not, the policy isn't prohibiting people from being hired. It's just having that space to talk and discuss what's going on. So I'm very, I find this favorable. So thank you for your work on it.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Yes. And then we have one more thing we have to come. We've had that attorney
I'm-
sitting here for a
I'm
while.
sorry. I agree with Ms. Molina almost. And I think the reason that I'm saying almost is because of my history with you have 34 people needed in a dispatch center. You currently have 16 dispatchers. If you say, well, you haven't been able to fill those positions for 20 years, then you don't, we're not going to put it in your budget. It's not because they're not actively trying. I mean, I'm just worried about that unintended consequence. So that needs to be, I think, written in there somehow, if that's the direction we're going, because it's a, you know, not just with dispatchers, but also with deputies and corrections officers. I mean, we can't fill those positions, but that does not mean that they're not needed.
Just like an engineer.
Well, I think if I may, and Kathy, I'm pleased I'm not speaking for you. Absolutely. But we have to have our department head. Remember, this is just for the government now. We cannot do any of this for our elected officials because that's in breach of their internal control. So just for our departments, if they need that, then they just put that down, that this is what's required and that we're going to be needing that, but that money cannot be used for other things. And that's could possibly be an issue. I'm saying it is an issue, but it certainly could possibly be an issue that salary is used for something else, another salary line, but not for the full intent of what it was for. So that's something we're being very mindful of, and it is to the benefit of our taxpayers and to us, because then we know how we budget appropriately. Okay, so since we've had a very patient attorney hiding behind the counter there.
He actually fell asleep there. For
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting conversation. So could I have thank you, Kathy. Thank
Madam
you.
Chair,
Yes,
that we go to executive session for the purpose of reviewing executive session minutes.
thank you, sir.
Second.
Second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Allen.
Bates,
Yes.
Berman,
Yes.
Doherty,
Yes.
Davis, Ford, Gums,
Gums, yes.
Kubi,
Should be I.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Caius,
Yes.
Leonard,
I'm sorry. I tried.
Lewis,
Yes.
Linder,
Linder, yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Roth,
He's left.
Silva,
Yes.
Strathman,
Yes.
Surges,
Here.
Tarver,
Yes.
Tepe, Williams,
I'm not eligible to vote.
approved.
Okay, those folks online, please accept the invites to go into closed session. Even if you are joining us online in the room, I need you to join the closed session. We are live streaming, so be aware until I give you the okay. Anything you say will be going out live to the public.
I borrowed Chris's.
I'm still waiting for one person online to join the closed session.
Did you type those out?
Yes.
Yeah, but you're not staying.
One of them has different strengths. And to mix them two up, oh my God, chaos.
All right, you are in open session.
We are back in open session. Clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Allen present.
Bates,
Present.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Doherty,
Right here.
Gums,
Comes here.
Juby,
Over here.
Kenyon, Caius,
Caius present.
Lewis,
This here.
Linder,
Linda here.
Molina,
Molina present.
Silva,
Silva's here.
Strathman,
Present.
Surges,
Surges here.
Tarver, Tepi,
Deputy here.
Williams, Pirog.
Here,
You have a quorum in the room.
very good. May I have a
Williams
motion?
is here, by the way.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Williams. May I have a motion and a second to approve the closed minutes as exhibited?
Madam Chair, this is Caius. I move that we pass the closed session minutes, release the closed session. That's exhibit A.
Very
Strathman
good.
second.
Other than that,
Thank you.
Takes time. You're in the way of dinner.
Okay, nothing? All right.
Dang it.
Okay, we're fine, fine. Do we have a consensus on that? We have to call the roll, I believe. Call the
Yeah.
roll, call the roll. Take the vote.
Vote to approve
the
minutes at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay,
Allen,
here we go.
Allen, I.
Bates,
Yes.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Doherty,
Right, yes.
Gums,
Comes, yes.
Juby,
Aye.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Caius,
Caius, yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Linder,
Linda, yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Silva,
Silva, yes.
Strathman,
Strathman, yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Tarver,
Carver, yes.
Tepi,
Yes.
Pirog. Approved.
All righty. May I have a motion and a second to adjourn?
I would move we adjourn.
Yes, sir.
Seconds.
Very good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hey.
God bless you all.